Hi and welcome back to the New Zealand Property Podcast and Video Series 2019 style. And we're starting off the series this year with a non-property visitor, Kieran Bird. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And Kieran is going to talk to us not about property, but something very important when you're negotiating a property, being negotiations. And that's what we're all here about today. And Kieran will tell us in a minute a bit about himself, that he's very qualified to talk to us about that. So welcome here, and before we start, just tell us a bit about what you do.
I'm a professional speaker and trainer, Mark, and I speak particularly on negotiation skills because I spent 30 odd years in the world of sales around the world, and I've always found obviously negotiation to be important. I also speak on very closely related topics, having the self-confidence to negotiate well, personal branding and body language, all parts of the negotiation puzzle, if you like.
Rightio. Well, great stuff, and I'm sure negotiators and property people here, new and old, will learn something from what you're going to talk about today. So let's get right into it. We'll start off with how important the impact of emotions with negotiating. And I know with property, sometimes it's your own home. People do get emotional about it. Usually it's facts and figures when it comes down to an investment. So keeping emotions in or out?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I mean, it is a crucial area, and it's not one that I think is talked about enough when people talk about negotiation skills. Mark just alluded to the fact that if someone's selling their home, they can have a strong emotional attachment to it. But it's not just about what you're buying or selling, it's about the process itself. And once we get emotionally involved in either a purchase or a sale, our judgment can get a little twisted. And greed can also have that effect. But the biggest one for most of us is fear in negotiation. Most people hate to negotiate. There's a lot of research that shows that. And it's because some people are good at subtly or not so subtly bullying. So before any negotiation, it's important that we say to ourselves, look, I'm going to negotiate now. This is important. How I feel is not that important. I'm going to do the right thing through the negotiation and not get carried away emotionally.
Interesting point you said there about people getting emotionally involved with it and not liking negotiating. That's why a lot of people don't even go to someone selling privately, because they don't like that potential friction between the vendor and that, and that's where it's great, and we think more people come along when an agent's selling the property for that exact reason.
Yeah, and obviously when they've got your professionals involved and they know, the job is going to be done right. But if somebody's inexperienced at negotiating, it can be very intimidating, and people want to shorten the discomfort and make bad decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, what's the difference then between relationship negotiating and transactional negotiating? And they're both quite different. Property's one and the rest of life's the other, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, often transactional negotiation is personal. So if we're going to Noel Leeming to buy whiteware, for example, or we're going to buy a car, we often don't care about the relationship with that individual. So we can be a little more robust, shall we say, in the tactics that we use. But it's important to first ask, how important is the relationship? If you want an ongoing relationship, and in business, more often than not we do, then that's got to be the overriding factor. Every tactic that's used must first consider that relationship. I mean, to take an extreme example, Mark, you can get to a point where the relationship is so important, you can have a reverse negotiation. I did this a few years ago. My best mate was selling his car, asked if I was interested in buying it, and I said yes. And we ended up, he was saying, oh no, maybe that's too much at higher price. And I was going, no, maybe I should pay $1,000 more, because the relationship was far more important than the deal. So that's always question one, how important is the relationship?
Yeah, but we've seen that sometimes where actually you start taking it away from them, saying, well, it's not going to be yours anyway. The buyer will jump back in and go, okay, no, actually I do want to keep negotiating, I do want this property. And it's really important what you said there, I think, because with property, some people negotiate very, very hard and are quite difficult, and the ones who actually want to carry on a longer relationship, as I say, it's a personal thing, and they want to carry on a long relationship with maybe you, the agent, or the vendor who's going to have more properties come up. They don't really want to brass them off the first time they do a deal with them, I guess.
Exactly,
yeah. Great. People talk about being three key factors in negotiating, and I know you talked to me before about that. Can you talk us through what those three are?
Absolutely, Mark. They're all very important. The first one is time. Obviously, if you're in a hurry and the person you're negotiating with is not, that creates an immediate power imbalance. So you've really got to watch time. I'd like to come back to that a little later, but it's just important that you don't get caught out, and aggressive negotiators will sometimes do that. Will find out how much time you've got and then make it very difficult. The second factor, which is very closely related, is power. And power again comes from a lot of different sources, Mark. For example, if an individual is going to negotiate with the chief executive of a major company, they will typically immediately feel a power imbalance. If you're going into their flash offices to negotiate, you feel less powerful than they do. And that's one of the factors that we should watch out for. Can we do it in our premises or theirs? Because we all feel more powerful, more comfortable at home. Other factors are important. Say, for example, you were going to go and look at the sale or a purchase of a house, and you found that you were negotiating against a team of, let's say, 15 rowdy tourists, and they're threatening to knock your block off. That would make you feel a lot less powerful. And anything that alters the power is got to be watched. And one of those is sheer numbers of people, let alone the people you're dealing with. If you're alone, you don't want to negotiate against 6 people. Power it's attached to a lot of different factors, as I say. The other one, of course, is information. If you know more about your opponent's position than they know about yours, that gives you extra power. So you know that they've got the money in the bank, they've got the financing, or indeed they are desperate to get the financing, they're desperate to make a move. History is full of fascinating examples of people who've done exceptionally well in negotiations just because perhaps their banker or someone else from their network was able to give them information on the other side. So time, information and power are the 3 main factors to consider.
And they're also relevant with negotiating investment property. The knowledge of, always spoken about that previously, is we went through a stage of 2 years. We negotiated about 300, but brought 30 properties we renovated, and most of them at mortgage sale. But knowing the situation of that person, that's what I concentrated on almost more than the property, because that's where that's where you had the power, I guess, from having the knowledge to actually go and do that. So having the knowledge is hugely important. So you're the purchaser out there, ask lots of questions, and hopefully the agent will answer what they're allowed to tell you. And the powers also, I think the power is really important in negotiating. If you are the party that doesn't have the power, is actually, I think, realising that and acknowledging that. We probably see too many people that they like being in the powerful situation, but in this particular property they haven't got that power. So if they haven't got the power, they just got to realise that situation that they haven't, and realise that there's reasons for it. If they don't have those reasons, if they understand those reasons, they might be able to buy the property. If they try to be the powerful person when they're not, probably won't be able to get the property. Indeed,
yeah, it pays to be very reasonable under those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. So these 3 good factors. What's the most important part of negotiating in your thinking?
Well, I've mentioned emotions, but the other part is planning, and that really should be part of your planning as well, considering your emotions. But when considering planning, most of us tend to rush in, and we don't stop and think about what some of the factors we've just considered, Mark. So what is the extra information? What are the details of my opponent? What might they want, for example, that's different than the price? We get very fixated whether buying or selling on the price, and it makes sense to think about, are there other options? Do they want the chattels in the house? Do they need more information about the new roading that's coming in? Those kind of things. So we've got to think about it from our perspective and from their perspective, to think about the different variables. And of course, buying a house, selling a house, there's as many as there are in any negotiation. And to think about the person we're negotiating with. If we know their personality type, for example, and they're a very dominant type, let's say a Donald Trump type, they very often want to get something. Indeed. Although much easier to negotiate with than he would think, because he's all bluster and aggression. And when you're dealing with somebody who you know is likely to be like that, you keep something up your sleeve to give them late in the piece that satisfies the ego and might get the deal. But unless you plan it out in advance, it's tricky.
Absolutely. No, planning is everything, and being adaptable, I think, to the situation is important. In fact, we just go probably back to your previous point, had a negotiation just in the last 2 weeks I've been involved with, and the one party is so used to, with their negotiating, giving and taking, sort of like you're saying, both parties have to give something. And in this case here, the vendor, there was nothing. They didn't have to give anything. They were either going to do it for this price, and that was it. And there was that was it. So he had all the power. And so eventually, after trying all of the other techniques that this other party's used to, and pretty experienced negotiating, he eventually come to the party and they did the deal, sort of thing.
Yeah, and this comes back, of course, to information. When you know the other side situation, sometimes you know you're going to do the deal at a certain price, or you're not, and no amount of tactics and time spent is actually going to change that.
Yeah.
So again, planning and having your information is crucial.
Yeah, sometimes the vendor or purchaser doesn't. The real estate agent might know, and they're saying what it is, but they don't believe the real estate agent, which is fair enough, because a lot of them, haven't got a great name.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, but yeah, sometimes we try to obviously say it as it is, it is, but hey, sometimes we're not being told the truth either. So it's good to give it a bit of a nudge, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm into quotes. I know you've got a quote from Roger Dawson. You never make money faster than when you're negotiating. I truly believe that. In property, you make money when you buy, and if you pay too much, it's too late. You can make money right there. So you tell your version of it.
Well, that's absolutely right, Mark. I mean, again, partly this is an important message because of the discomfort that most people feel when they negotiate. So we've got to think about, how important it is. Well, the reality is, in a big purchase or a big sale, you never make money faster than when you negotiate. And that can give you a lot of comfort in terms of, just saying to yourself, look, it's only a game, but it's important and I'll take my time. Very, very important, and always think about the deal, and spend as much time as possible. It's also important not to think necessarily too much about percentages rather than dollars. And this is a dangerous game when you're in the big money, like houses, for example. A great example, a friend of mine in Auckland in the 90s was about to sell a house and buy a new house, and I was helping him out a little bit in the background. And I walked into his house 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, and he was all excited. They were only 2K apart on buying the next house. And he said, look, it's such a small percentage of the total price, I'm just going to call back and fold. And I said, no, it's 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. Neither of us have any indication there is another serious buyer ready to go. That $2,000 is a small percentage, but it's $2,000. It's still $2,000.
Pay for your solicitor.
Absolutely. And so my friend slept on it, and the next morning the agent was ready to cave because they'd had all night to sweat over it. So, you'll never make money faster than when you're negotiating, and if you're sleeping at the same time, even better.
Absolutely. And it comes back to the time thing. Also, you said before, sometimes if you've got time on your side, time can certainly, when I've had a similar situation before with a multi-offer situation where we've gone back to the 3 parties, it was all the same figure. Do you have any more money? Sleep on it, and they come in, all 3 come back with one didn't move, 2 did. And then before we even went back to the vendor, in about 15 minutes, one of the vendors who already negotiated higher come back and went higher again. So the vendor did pretty well out of that one. It wasn't a delay, but it was just a time thing. They wanted it, and and then they're in a hurry to do it. But by waiting an extra 10 minutes, got an extra $3,000 or $4,000. So
that's why we should welcome the chance to negotiate, whether we feel comfortable or not.
Absolutely. Some people negotiate for the hell of it because it's fun doing it. So why not?
Indeed, indeed. Yeah.
That's good. So what's the 3 tactics that you find works best with negotiating?
Well, if we had time, Mark, as you can imagine, there's a dozen that I'd like to talk
I think
through.
3. Yep.
Yeah, but 3 that I think are very important. First of all, it may sound a little silly, but it's the flinch. And I mean literally the flinch. And that's because, again, coming back to negotiations, to emotions, we can use emotions to our advantage as well. So when somebody gives us a price, or they give us the counter price, if we calmly act like, we're all cool, we can handle that, and say, no, that's not the right deal, that has one effect. But if we literally go, what? We physically flinch, that immediately alters how the other person feels. It lowers their expectations. And the interesting thing is you can do this just as well over the phone. You know, famous research from the late 60s found that our body language is more important than our tone of voice, and our tone of voice is more important than the words. And this is acknowledging that. Over the phone, when somebody gives you a price you're not happy with, make a little gasp sound. That's your flinch. Over the phone, tone of voice is 70% of how we communicate. Face to face, 55% is body language. So look physically shocked. Another one that is a big favourite of mine, I'll tell you a quick story about it as well, Mark, is higher authority. This is something that's used regularly, but it pays to be very aware of when other people are using it on you. As I say, personal example. In 2001, my wife and I had just moved from the UK to the US, and we were a bit behind the times. As we were setting up our house, we fancied getting one of those green and white striped couches that was very popular in the 90s. I say we, my wife fancied it, and I went along with it, of course. And I was reading a book about negotiation at the time, and reading about this higher authority, and I was looking forward to an opportunity to try it. And I noticed one of these couches, nearly new, $250 advertised locally. So I said to my wife, right, I'll go and get that couch, and I'm going to see how cheaply I can get it. I'm just going to try out a technique, and you might get a strange phone call from me when I'm gone. So first of all, when I turned up at the house, it was a beautiful home, and they were a beautiful young couple, obviously doing very well. That was a mistake to show that off, but also they'd put the couch in the driveway. You know, obviously in the selling world, we'd call that a buying signal, or in their case, a selling signal.
Yeah.
They desperately wanted to get rid of it, and they didn't care about the price. So that was another error they made. So here's what I did to get the lowest price possible. I walked up and I had a slightly pained expression on my face, Mark, a bit like that. And I said, oh, sorry, I thought it had the wider stripes, not the narrow stripes. I'm pretty sure my wife wanted the wider stripes, but I better go and call the boss and ask. So I kind of slumped my body language a bit, and I walked off. And yeah, exactly. And I called my wife, looking like a beaten man, and said, explained the situation. And then I said, oh, but babe, you're not interested at all? But I've driven all this way. You don't want me to offer anything for it? And then I kind of shook my head and I walked over, looked very sheepishly at the man, and I said, I'm really embarrassed, but it's not exactly what we're looking for. And my wife doesn't want me to offer any more than $50 for it. And he said, $50 is fine. And he shook my hand. Now, on the one hand, you wouldn't do that in a relationship negotiation because there's a little bit of trickery there. But did he get what he wanted? Yes, he badly wanted the couch gone. They had plenty of money.
Yep.
Also, I made him feel like a much bigger man than me for those few seconds. He seemed to enjoy the process, so sometimes it's whatever works. Higher authority, often it's better rather than saying one person, because of course, if he was a trained salesman, he would have said, no problem, let's go and talk to her about it. So that's when you want to use the board or the committee. So it's a vague group that they can't speak to directly. Higher authority is enormously powerful. The third I'd like to mention is don't offer to split the difference. Now in New Zealand, we're British kind of cultural values, fairness is hugely important to us. So if you're $2,000 apart on the sale of a house, we automatically start to think as decent human beings, well, we could just meet in the middle, split the difference. But my advice is don't necessarily do that. Allow the other person to split the difference first, and they say, well, tell you what, let's meet in the middle, 1,000. And then you can use higher authority and go, okay, thank you so much for coming down that $1,000. So we're only $1,000 apart. I have to ask she who must be obeyed, or indeed the committee or the whole family, and they're very big and they're very rough. And I'll go away and come back and we'll sort this out tomorrow. And then the next day you can come back and go, oh boy, I took a bit of a tongue lashing for that because we'd already agreed on the price. And she said no way she could drop another 1,000, but seeing as I'm here, what about if we split the difference and make it $500? So you can split the difference 2 or 3 times rather than once and save some money.
Yeah, I use that split the difference one a few times myself. I'm just starting to wonder if it's a good idea having you here, because you're going to make our life a hell of a lot harder coming up, I think. But no, it's all very, very cool, and good ideas there, that's for sure. Great tactics, I love it. We like to think we're a pretty ethical sort of company here and do things right. When someone comes up with an unethical negotiation, how do you cope with that?
Well, I guess it depends on the specific tactics that are used, Mark. It varies so much. We've already covered off emotions and bullying, and usually the best way to handle that is just to ignore it. But let's say time pressure, that is often used, and often used very, very effectively. And it can be used equally by both sides. There's a really interesting story from history that really spells this out clearly. This is at the late in the Vietnam War, when Nixon's team, Kissinger and so on, went to Paris to negotiate with the North Vietnamese. And the Vietnamese knew what the Americans wanted. Both of them did. It was pretty straightforward. They knew that the Americans wanted the war over before the next election. Fairly straightforward. So the Americans, to put time pressure on the North Vietnamese, were bombing the heck out of North Vietnam during the process, figuring they knew that their people were dying, they would have to negotiate quickly. And the Vietnamese showed just how threatened they were by that, by two ways. While the Americans rented out the top floor of the Hyatt for the length of the negotiations, the Vietnamese bought a villa in the country. Now there's a signal. And the other thing is, famously at the time, there were headlines saying that they had spent 6 months negotiating over the size of the conference table. Now that was the Vietnamese saying, you can do what you want, you can keep bombing, we're going to take our time and get the result that we want. And of course, famously, the Vietnamese won completely. The Americans got nothing over it. So you can look at time pressure both ways. The other very, very common one is vague answers. And that's where people might mumble a bit or use some jargon or just simply give a vague term. Yeah, we'll take care of that soon, for example, a specific date. If you repeat the question and you get another vague answer, this is a tactic trying to make you feel stupid by having to ask more questions. And this is where you've got to fall back on one of the most important rules in all of negotiating, which is ask more questions. Ask tons of questions. So don't allow any vague answers, and if they continue, then you've got to ask if you're going to continue with the negotiation. Threaten to walk away. Speaking of which, when you're at the end of the negotiation, grinding is a very, very common one, and this is often your tough, aggressive negotiator will just keep asking and keep asking. Oh, of course, I'll need the car park, and I'll need the neighbour's car thrown in, and I'll need this, and I'll need that. And the only thing you can really do there is take away. Oh, well, we can do that, but of course we won't be able to agree to what we agreed earlier. We'll have to take that part of the deal away, or indeed walk away from the whole agreement.
That might stop the the negotiator that sort of the greedy or just keeps trying it on. So stops them when they know things have been taken off them. And the knowledge is so important. We've just been, I said it beside trying to give advice for what it was worth in a negotiation about 2 weeks ago. A friend of mine was looking to buy a property management business, and he sat there with the owner. In fact, so it was nice having three of us around the table, and but he was here just knowledge, asking, and but it was good. I mean that's a very big asset or to buy. It's even bigger than most properties. So he wanted to make sure nothing wrong with asking the question to find out anything. And again, the more you ask, the more you might find something isn't so good with a property or business or whatever it may be you're negotiating.
Even repeating the question, sometimes get a slightly different answer.
Absolutely. And you go, oh, okay, how much do I really trust this character?
Absolutely.
So that's all good. Any final thoughts or about negotiating that you'd like to pass on to our listeners?
Only this really, that if you think of negotiation as a game, genuinely like a game, like when you're playing golf or any other game that you love, there's two benefits to that. One is emotion, keep coming back to that fact. But the other is, when we think about a game we love, we practice it. And if you practice negotiation like any other skill, you'll get better at it. You'll be more effective in your personal life and in your business life.
Great stuff. Good wise comments there.
Thank you, Mark.
Now we're going to get Kieran back sometime in a few weeks' time to do another non-property related topic. But I'm sure everyone's got a lot out of this today. So if someone wants to catch up with you or hear you talk about something else, how can they get hold of you? KieranBird.com is my website. It looks ugly at the moment, but in a couple of weeks it's going to look fantastic. I look forward to hearing from you. All good, and we'll have the details anyway on our podcast page. So thanks for coming. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, listeners, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Cheers. Thanks.